Now let's take a closer look at the response from the server. The response must indicate if the action was successful, or if the action failed, why it failed. If you recollect, response messages contain a status code. A status code is a 3-digit number, and the first digit defines the type of the response, and based on the first digit we have the following 5 categories: informational, success, redirection, client error, and server error. Let's look at the details of each of these categories. The first is the 1XX, or the informational category. These responses are from 100 to 199, so there are 100 possibilities. Let's take a look at 2 examples. We're not going to go through all 100 of them, but let's just look at a few possibilities. 100 is a response that says continue, which means that the client must continue sending the request. 101 means switching protocols. The server understands and will switch the protocol to the requested protocol. For example, there are certain protocols written on top of HTTP like WebSockets, and the server can use 101 to tell the client that it's switching to this special protocol. 2XX is the most commonly used HTTP response. It's from 200 to 299, so there are 100 values. And 200 is the very most commonly used response code, which is OK, which means that the request succeeded. 201, we saw this earlier. It just means that the content was created, usually as part of a post request. 202 means that the request has been accepted for processing, but it's not completed yet, and the client must, at a later point, query the server to get the status of the request. 204 means no content, which means that the request has been processed, but no new content was created, so the client does not have to ask for the new content. And 205 is quite important. It means reset content, so the request was sent and was processed and successful, and now there is new content which the server can load. So this is used in UXs where the 205 response means that the front end can load the data from the back end once again. Let's take an example now for the 3XX redirection to establish the concept. So there's a case where there's a GET request sent on users Alice, but the server has actually moved this to a different URL, which is API v1 users Alice. So this move, or the change in the location, is called a redirection, and the server indicates this to the client using the 301 response, and it also puts the new URL in that response. And the server can now use this URL, which is API v1 users Alice, and the server sends a response with the data. This is the concept of redirection. So let's look at once again a few examples. The redirection is 300 to 399, so 100 values. We will just look at a few examples. 300 means that there are multiple choices available, so it could be users Alice or API v1 users Alice, etc., etc. So there could be a bunch of options, and the client can choose between these options. 301 means that the item has been moved permanently, so all future requests the server must make to the new location. 302 means that the item was found. This is a temporary redirection, and it only happens for the current request. When the client makes a new request, it has to still use the old location. 305 is use proxy, which means that the resource should not be accessed directly at the server, but it must use a proxy. This requires some more details, which we can see later. 4XX, or 400 to 499, is the client error, which means the client made some error while sending the request, and there are a few possibilities here. 400 just means that the request was bad, so the headers was wrong, the body was wrong, the request was malformatted, it was in the wrong format. For example, the server expects JSON, but the client sends a plain text request, etc., etc. So this is a broad category of all the things that the client did bad with the request. 401 is unauthorized, which means that no authorization provided or some authorization was incorrect, so the client cannot access this data. 403 there's a slight difference between 401 and 403, which means it's forbidden. In this case, the client does not have the rights, so which means that authorization was provided, the authorization was successfully validated, but the client does not have rights to access certain areas. 404 is a very commonly known response code, which means that the item was not found. And 405 means that the method was not allowed. So for example, in some cases you expect only a post, but then the server sent a put. In those cases, you can send a 405 to say that the method was not allowed for this URL. And the final case is the 5xx 500 to 599 server error. The difference between this and the 4xx errors is that in this case, the error is on the server side and the client really cannot do anything here. It wasn't the client's fault, it was the server's fault. The client must either wait and try again or contact the administrator of the server to check what the problem was. There are a few common cases here, which is 500. The internal server error case, which means there's something wrong in the server. This is a very generic error that could cover many different types of server faults. If you see this error, most likely you need to either wait or contact the administrator of the server. 501 means that the item was not implemented. This is a very special case where you're making a request for some data and that type of data or that route was never implemented. 502 means a bad gateway. This is used in terms of the cases where there's a proxy in front of a server and the proxy did not receive a valid response from the server. So this is in multi-part communication. 503 means the service is unavailable. This means exactly what it says.